Strip that shirt off, sweetheart. I want to see you welcome us properly. The sound of fabric tearing. A timestamp flashing 11:47 and 23 seconds. The red light of a badge scanner refusing access. 47 terabytes. 3 cameras. 0 escape routes. Jake Thompson set his work gloves down on the metal workbench with deliberate precision. The morning shift at Memphis Steelworks had barely begun, but he'd already decided how this Tuesday would end. The new quality control inspector stood 3 feet away, clipboard in hand, brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. 27 years old according to her file. Fresh from some desk job in Nashville, probably thought she could waltz into a real workplace and start changing things. Riley Martinez kept her eyes on the inspection checklist. Badge number 327 hung from her belt, still pristine after 2 weeks on the job. The badge that would matter more than she knew. "You listening to me, Inspector?" Jake's voice carried the weight of 8 years supervising this floor. 8 years of breaking in newcomers who thought they were special. "I said strip." Riley looked up from her paperwork. Her voice came out steady, measured. "Count the scars. I already did." Jake blinked. In all his years of intimidation, nobody had ever responded like that. Most new hires either cowered or tried to play tough. This one sounded like she was reading from a manual he'd never seen. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me correctly." Riley's pen moved across the inspection form, noting a hydraulic fluid leak near Station 7. "Shift starts in 12 minutes. You might want to brief your team on today's safety protocols." The Memphis Steelworks fabrication floor stretched out behind them like a cathedral of industry. Overhead cranes moved finished beams toward shipping. Welding sparks danced across the concrete. 300 employees would clock in soon, most of them unaware that their workplace had become a hunting ground. Jake stepped closer. "Let me explain something about protocols, little girl. You see that office up there?" He pointed to the glass-walled HR department overlooking the floor. "Barbara Wells has been running human resources here for 6 years. She knows exactly how things work. And what she knows is that new inspectors who cause trouble tend to have very short careers." Riley made another note on her clipboard. "Interesting perspective." "Here's another perspective. You've got 72 hours before the company compliance audit team arrives. That's 72 hours to either learn your place or find yourself a new job." Jake's smile held no warmth. "Guess which one I'm betting on." The badge scanner near the main entrance beeped. Workers were arriving early, eager to start their shifts. Riley watched the green lights flash as legitimate access codes went through. Her own badge had been programmed differently. She knew because she'd tested it 3 times yesterday evening, each failed swipe recorded by security cameras she wasn't supposed to know about. "Mr. Thompson," she said, still writing, "do you happen to know what time you swiped your badge this morning?" "What kind of question is that?" "Quality control question. Everything gets documented." Riley looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "For instance, I know you arrived at 6:53 a.m. 47 minutes early. That's unusual for a Tuesday." Jake's confidence flickered. How could she possibly know his arrival time? Badge logs weren't accessible to quality control. At least, they weren't supposed to be. "Been doing your homework, have you?" "Always do." Riley tucked the clipboard under her arm. "Speaking of homework, I noticed this facility had 14 OSHA violations last quarter. That's quite a record." "Ancient history." Actually, the pattern analysis shows escalation, minor infractions building toward major incidents, like someone's creating a paper trail. Riley's voice stayed conversational, but her eyes had sharpened. makes a person wonder what comes next. This wasn't going according to plan. Jake had run this intimidation routine dozens of times. New employees were supposed to be nervous, apologetic, eager to please. They weren't supposed to arrive armed with facility statistics and badge access data. Most importantly, they weren't supposed to make him feel like he was the one being inspected. The morning horn sounded. 7 a.m. sharp. 300 workers began streaming through the main entrance, their badges flashing green as the scanner approved their access. The fabrication floor came alive with the sounds of industry, hydraulic presses engaging, conveyor belts starting their endless loops, the distant whine of metal cutting metal. Barbara Wells emerged from her office, descending the stairs with the practiced authority of someone who'd spent years managing workplace conflicts. 52 years old, silver hair, wearing the kind of smile that made employees feel both welcomed and warned. She'd built her reputation on protecting workers from harassment, while somehow never quite eliminating the harassment itself. "Good morning, Riley," Barbara called out as she approached. "How are you settling in?" "Learning the systems," Riley replied. "Mr. Thompson was just explaining the local protocols." "Jake's been our floor supervisor for almost a decade. Nobody knows this facility better." Barbara's tone carried genuine warmth, the kind that made newcomers feel they'd found an ally. "I hope he's been helpful." Jake recovered his composure. "Just making sure our new inspector understands how things work around here." "Excellent. Riley, I wanted to let you know that my door is always open. Quality control can be a challenging position, especially for someone adjusting to industrial work. If you ever need guidance or support, please don't hesitate to reach out." Riley nodded politely. "I appreciate that, Ms. Wells." "Barbara, please. We are all family here at Memphis Steel." Barbara glanced at her watch. "I have a vendor meeting at 8:30, but I'll check in with you later this afternoon. Make sure you're settling in properly." As Barbara walked away, Jake felt his confidence returning. The HR director had just demonstrated something crucial. Riley Martinez was alone. No matter what data she thought she had access to, no matter how prepared she seemed, she was still just one person against an entire system. A system that had been operating smoothly for years. "You see how it works?" Jake said quietly. "Barbara's a good woman, but she's got 300 employees to worry about. Accidents happen on a floor like this. Inspectors who make waves tend to have more accidents than inspectors who keep their heads down." Riley resumed her inspection checklist, moving toward the welding stations. Fascinating theory. "It's not a theory. It's a promise." Riley stopped at welding station 4, where sparks flew in controlled arcs as a beam took shape. The welder, a man in his 40s named Tommy Rodriguez, looked up as she approached. "Morning, Inspector. Everything looking good?" "Station's clean," Riley confirmed, making notes. "How long have you been working this position, Tommy?" 8 years next month. Started the same week Jake got promoted to supervisor." Tommy glanced nervously toward Jake, who was watching from 20 feet away. "Why do you ask?" "Standard question. Part of the workflow analysis." Riley's pen moved across the form. "Do you ever work overtime shifts?" "Sometimes, when we're behind on orders." "And who approves the overtime?" "Supervisor request goes through HR. Barbara handles the paperwork." Tommy's voice dropped lower. "Look, Inspector, I don't want any trouble. I got kids to feed." Riley looked up from her clipboard. Something in Tommy's tone suggested this conversation was more important than it appeared. "No trouble, Tommy. Just documenting procedures." She moved on to the next station, leaving Tommy to his work. But she'd caught something in his expression, a flicker of fear that went beyond normal supervisor intimidation. Tommy Rodriguez knew something that made him afraid to answer simple questions about overtime. Jake followed her progress across the floor, no longer bothering to hide his surveillance. Other workers noticed the attention their new inspector was receiving. Conversations became quieter when she approached. Eye contact became briefer. The message was clear. Riley Martinez was marked. At Station 7, where she'd noted the hydraulic leak earlier, Riley found herself alone for a moment. The nearest workers were 20 feet away, absorbed in their tasks. She reached into her jacket pocket and activated a device smaller than a smartphone. Military-grade body camera, designed for intelligence gathering in hostile territory. She'd worn similar equipment in 3 different countries during her Army service. The device began recording. Quality control log, Tuesday, Memphis Steel Works, 11:47 a.m., she spoke quietly into the collar-mounted microphone. Documented intimidation attempt by floor supervisor Jake Thompson. Pattern suggests coordinated effort with HR involvement. Badge access anomalies confirm preliminary surveillance assumptions. A shadow fell across her clipboard. Derek Shaw, Chief of Security, stood 3 feet away. 48 years old, former police officer, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who controlled information flow throughout the facility. Talking to yourself, Inspector? Recording inspection notes, Riley replied smoothly. Digital workflow management. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. Company policy requires approval for recording devices on the factory floor. Safety regulation. Of course. Riley powered down the body camera with a gesture Derek couldn't see. I'll submit the paperwork to HR. See that you do. Derek made his own note on a security pad. We take compliance very seriously here. As Derek walked away, Riley understood that her cover was already compromised. Someone had been watching her closely enough to notice the recording device. Someone with access to security protocols and enough authority to challenge a quality control inspector directly. The morning break whistle sounded. Workers began moving toward the break room, conversations resuming their normal volume as supervision relaxed. Riley found herself walking alongside Maria Santos, a crane operator who'd been with the company for 12 years. First couple weeks are always tough, Maria said quietly. People testing boundaries, seeing what you're made of. Seems like more than boundary testing. Maria glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. Can I give you some advice? Off the record? I'm listening. Jake Thompson didn't become floor supervisor because he was the most qualified. He got promoted because he solved certain problems for certain people. Problems that required a particular kind of solution. What kind of problems? The kind that make trouble for management. Complaints about working conditions, requests for safety improvements, union organizing attempts. Maria's voice became barely audible. Workers who ask too many questions tend to find themselves working fewer hours. Fewer hours means less money. Less money means they start looking for work somewhere else. Riley processed this information carefully. And HR supports this approach. Barbara Wells is very good at her job, very good at making sure the company's interests are protected while maintaining plausible deniability. Maria stopped walking as they reached the break room entrance. Be careful, Inspector. This place has rules that aren't written in any manual. Inside the break room, conversations died as Riley entered. 30 workers sat at metal tables, eating breakfast and drinking coffee from thermos bottles. Every eye tracked her movement as she walked to the vending machine and bought a bottle of water. Jake Thompson sat at the largest table, surrounded by his most loyal crew members. He made no effort to hide his discussion about the new inspector. Words like attitude problem and needs adjustment carried clearly across the room. Before this conversation gets any deeper, I want to pause for a moment. If this is your first time watching stories like this on our channel, please hit the like button and subscribe to follow more tales of justice and courage. And don't forget to hit the thanks button to support our continued coverage of people brave enough to stand up for what's right. I'm also curious, where are you watching this story from? What country are you tuning in from? Share your location in the comments below. Riley took a seat at an empty table, aware that her isolation was intentional. She opened her inspection manual and began reviewing procedures for evidence documentation, a process she'd learned during her military intelligence training, chain of custody protocols, digital forensics, witness protection procedures. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Parking lot, blue sedan, 5 minutes. Riley looked around the break room. Nobody appeared to be watching her phone, but someone had her number. Someone who wanted a private conversation away from company surveillance. She finished her water and walked outside to the employee parking lot. The Memphis morning was already heating up, promising another scorching Tennessee summer day. She found the blue sedan parked near the back fence, engine running. The driver's window rolled down to reveal a woman in her 30s wearing a suit and sunglasses. Riley Martinez? Who's asking? Agent Sarah Hendricks, Department of Labor. Get in. Riley climbed into the passenger seat, immediately noticing the federal credentials clipped to the sun visor. Agent Hendricks handed her a business card and a sealed envelope.
"We've been monitoring Memphis Steelworks for 3 months," Hendricks said without preamble. "Complaints about harassment, safety violations, and financial irregularities. Your employment application included some interesting qualifications, such as Army intelligence, document analysis, surveillance training." Hendricks started driving toward the main road. "The Department of Labor has been looking for someone with your skills to conduct an internal investigation." Riley opened the envelope. Inside was a federal authorization letter and a detailed list of suspected violations: financial embezzlement, safety budget misappropriation, systematic harassment designed to eliminate whistleblowers. "You want me to go undercover. You already are undercover. Your quality control position gives you access to documentation that outside investigators couldn't obtain without tipping off the targets." Hendricks turned onto the main highway. "We need proof, real evidence that will hold up in federal court." "And if I get caught?" "You won't, because you're not going to do anything illegal or unethical. You're simply going to document what you observe and report safety violations through proper channels." Hendricks pulled into a gas station and stopped near the back of the lot. "The authorization letter gives you federal whistleblower protection, but you need to be careful. Memphis Steel has been very effective at silencing internal dissent." Riley studied the paperwork. Everything was properly signed and notarized. Official Department of Labor letterhead. Federal case number. This was legitimate. "How much time do I have?" 72 hours. "The compliance audit team arrives Friday morning. If we don't have actionable evidence by then, the investigation goes public, and your cover gets blown." Hendricks handed her a secure phone. "This connects directly to our task force. Use it only for emergencies." "What kind of evidence are you looking for?" "Financial records showing safety budget diversions. Email communications proving intentional harassment. Security footage documenting hostile work environment creation." Hendricks paused. "But most importantly, we need to identify the person coordinating these activities, someone with enough authority to manipulate multiple systems simultaneously." Riley thought about Barbara Wells's helpful demeanor and Jake Thompson's casual confidence, about Derek Shaw's knowledge of recording devices and Tommy Rodriguez's fear of simple questions.
Any suspects? Everyone's a suspect until proven otherwise. Trust nobody. Document everything. Hendricks checked her watch. You've been away from work for 18 minutes. Any longer, and people will start asking questions. Riley pocketed the secure phone and authorization letter. One more thing. My badge access has been restricted. I can't get into certain areas. Intentional security measure or harassment tactic. Unknown. But someone programmed my access codes differently than standard employee credentials. Hendricks made a note. Could be both. Restricted access keeps you from seeing sensitive information, but it also creates a paper trail of attempted entries. Someone wants to know where you're trying to go. Riley climbed out of the sedan and walked back toward the Memphis Steelworks facility. Behind her, Agent Hendricks drove away without looking back. The parking lot appeared empty, but Riley had learned to assume constant surveillance in hostile territory. She swiped badge number 327 at the main entrance. Red light. Access denied. A security guard appeared at the door. Problem with your badge, Inspector? Seems to be malfunctioning. The guard, a young man named Pete Williams, manually opened the door. Happens sometimes with new badges. You should get Derek Shaw to reprogram it. I'll do that. Inside the facility, the lunch shift was beginning. Workers moved between stations with practiced efficiency. Overhead cranes transported materials according to schedules posted on bulletin boards near each work area. Everything appeared normal, productive, safe. Riley made her way back to the quality control station, where her morning inspection reports waited for completion. She began documenting the hydraulic leak at Station 7, noting the specific type of fluid, the estimated quantity, and the potential safety implications. Her phone rang. Internal company line. Inspector Martinez? This is Barbara Wells. Could you come to my office, please? I have some paperwork we need to discuss. On my way. Riley climbed the stairs to the HR department, her body camera recording everything from chest level. The glass-walled office provided a perfect view of the factory floor below. Barbara sat behind a mahogany desk covered with employee files and compliance manuals. Please sit down, Barbara gestured to a comfortable chair. How was your morning? Any issues I should be aware of? Standard inspection procedures, a few minor safety items that need attention. Excellent. That's exactly what we want to hear. Barbara opened a file folder. I've been reviewing your employment history. Very impressive background, military service, technical training, document analysis experience. Riley kept her expression neutral. Previous experience helps with attention to detail. I'm sure it does, although I noticed something interesting in your personnel file. Barbara's tone remained friendly, but her eyes had hardened slightly. Your employment references all check out perfectly, almost too perfectly. Meaning? Meaning someone with your qualifications could work anywhere. Defense contractors pay top dollar for intelligence analysts. Government agencies recruit heavily from military intelligence backgrounds. Barbara leaned forward. So why are you here? Why Memphis Steelworks? This was the question Riley had been preparing for since accepting the assignment. Her cover story needed to be plausible enough to withstand scrutiny while protecting her real mission. Personal reasons. My family has roots in Memphis. I wanted to transition from military work to civilian employment without leaving Tennessee. Family roots. How nice. Barbara made notes in the file. And your long-term career goals? Quality control offers stability and opportunities for advancement. I'm hoping to establish myself here permanently. Barbara closed the file and smiled. The warmth returned to her voice, but something cold remained in her eyes. We certainly hope you'll be happy here. Memphis Steel Works values employees who understand the importance of teamwork and loyalty. I'm committed to doing good work. I'm sure you are. Just remember that good work sometimes requires flexibility, willingness to adapt to local customs and procedures. Barbara stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll be interested to see your inspection reports. Quality control plays such an important role in maintaining our safety standards. Riley stood to leave. I'll have today's reports completed by end of shift. Wonderful. Oh, one more thing. Barbara's voice stopped her at the door. I understand you've been having trouble with your badge access. Derek Shaw can fix that immediately. In fact, he's expecting you. As Riley left the HR office, she understood that the friendly conversation had been an interrogation. Barbara Wells had been testing her cover story, probing for weaknesses, gathering intelligence about her true motivations. The badge access problem wasn't a technical glitch. It was a control mechanism. She found Derek Shaw in the security office, a small room filled with monitors showing different angles of the factory floor. He looked up from a computer terminal as she entered. Badge problems? Access keeps getting denied. Derek held out his hand. Let me see it. Let me see. Riley handed over badge number 327, watching as Derek connected it to a programming device. Lines of code scrolled across his computer screen. There's your problem, Derek said after a moment. Your access level was set to temporary visitor instead of permanent employee. Must have been a data entry error. He typed several commands, then disconnected the badge and handed it back. Try it now. Riley walked to the security office door and swiped the badge. Green light. Access granted. Much better, thank you. Don't mention it. Computer systems can be temperamental. Derek turned back to his monitors. By the way, I noticed you've been asking questions about overtime procedures and badge access logs. Quality control doesn't usually involve those areas. Workflow analysis includes understanding all facility systems. Fair enough. Just remember that some information is classified for security reasons. Trade secrets, personnel files, financial data. Derek's tone stayed conversational, but the warning was clear. We wouldn't want any proprietary information to accidentally end up in the wrong hands. Riley returned to the factory floor with her newly functional badge and a growing understanding of how Memphis Steel Works really operated. Jake Thompson controlled physical intimidation. Barbara Wells managed emotional manipulation and institutional protection. Derek Shaw handled information security and surveillance. But there was something else. Something in the way they coordinated their approaches. The seamless handoffs between different forms of pressure. This wasn't random harassment. It was systematic suppression designed to eliminate threats before they could develop into serious problems. She spent the afternoon completing inspection reports and observing worker interactions. Tommy Rodriguez avoided eye contact when she passed his welding station. Maria Santos nodded politely but didn't attempt conversation. The message had been distributed. Riley Martinez was isolated. At 4 p.m., as the day shift prepared to end, Riley's phone buzzed with another internal call. Inspector Martinez, Jake Thompson, I need you to stay late tonight. Quality control inspection of the night shift operations. That's not standard procedure for new employees. It is when the inspector needs additional training. 7 p.m. start time. Don't be late. The line went dead before Riley could respond. She looked around the factory floor and realized that most of the day shift workers were packing up to leave. In 3 hours, she would be alone with the night shift crew and whatever additional pressure Jake Thompson had planned. Riley is about to face her most dangerous challenge yet, alone with the night shift crew who have been coordinated to break her. If you were in Riley's shoes right now, would you show up for this training session, or would you find a way to avoid it? Let me know what you think she should do in the comments below. Riley walked to her car and drove to a coffee shop 6 blocks from the facility. She needed privacy to contact Agent Hendricks and assess her situation. The secure phone connected immediately. Hendricks. It's Martinez. They're escalating. I'm being required to work night shift inspection tonight. Alone? That's the implication. Jake Thompson made it sound like mandatory training, but the timing feels wrong. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. Night shift has fewer witnesses, fewer cameras recording public areas. If they're planning something more aggressive than verbal intimidation, that would be the time to do it. What do you recommend? Continue the mission, but be extremely careful. Make sure your body camera is fully charged and that you have backup recording methods. Hendricks paused. And Martinez? If things go wrong tonight, document everything. Even if you can't prevent what happens, make sure we have evidence. Riley returned to Memphis Steelworks at 6:45 p.m. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars belonging to security and night shift supervisors. The building looked different in the evening light. Less industrial cathedral, more concrete fortress. She swiped badge number 327 at the main entrance. Green light. Access granted. Inside, the facility hummed with reduced activity. Night shift ran a skeleton crew focused on maintenance and cleanup operations. Perfect environment for private conversations that day shift workers would never witness. Jake Thompson waited near the quality control station, no longer bothering to hide his hostility. Right on time. That's what I like to see. What kind of inspection do you need? The kind that teaches important lessons about workplace safety. Jake gestured toward the far end of the facility, where the shipping bay doors stood open to the Memphis evening. Walk. Riley activated her body camera as she followed Jake across the empty factory floor. Their footsteps echoed off concrete walls and steel beams. Overhead, security cameras tracked their movement, but Riley noticed several dark spots where the surveillance coverage appeared incomplete. They reached the shipping bay, where finished steel beams waited for morning delivery trucks. Jake stopped near a stack of I-beams and turned to face her. Here's what's going to happen, Inspector. You're going to learn that Memphis Steel Works has certain traditions, certain ways of welcoming new employees who think they're special. 2 figures emerged from behind the steel stack. Derek Shaw and another man Riley didn't recognize, late 30s, wearing work clothes, carrying himself like someone accustomed to violence. "This is Bobby Patterson," Jake said. "Night shift supervisor. He's been looking forward to meeting you." Bobby smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Heard you've been asking a lot of questions, Inspector. Questions about things that aren't really your business." Riley looked around the shipping bay. No other workers visible. No active security cameras in this section. The 3 men had positioned themselves to block her path back to the main facility. "Actually," Riley said, reaching into her jacket, "I think you'll find that everything happening here is definitely my business." She pulled out the federal authorization letter Agent Hendricks had given her and held it where all 3 men could see the Department of Labor letterhead. "Federal Investigation Authorization. I'm documenting workplace harassment and safety violations under the authority of the U.S. Department of Labor." Riley's voice carried military command authority. "You gentlemen are being recorded for federal evidence purposes." Jake's confidence wavered for the first time since morning. "That's nonsense. You're just a quality control inspector." "No, Mr. Thompson. I'm a federal investigator with whistleblower protection conducting an authorized law enforcement operation." Riley folded the letter and returned it to her jacket. "And you've just escalated simple workplace harassment into federal obstruction of justice." Derek stepped forward. "Show me that authorization again." Show me your federal law enforcement credentials, and I'll consider it. The three men exchanged glances. Whatever they'd planned for tonight, it hadn't included federal involvement. But Riley could see them recalculating, deciding whether to retreat or push forward despite the new complications. Bobby Patterson moved to his left, beginning to flank her position. Lot of fancy paperwork for someone who's about to have an accident. Jake's face darkened with rage. I don't care what kind of federal nonsense you're spouting. You came into our facility. You disrespected our authority. You asked questions that weren't your business. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of Riley's work shirt with both hands. The fabric strained as Jake's fingers twisted into the material. Now you're going to learn what happens to people who don't know their place. Jake yanked hard, intending to intimidate through physical dominance. But Riley's shirt was made of standard cotton blend, and Jake's grip was fueled by 8 years of pent-up frustration. The fabric gave way with a loud, tearing sound. Riley's shirt ripped down the front, exposing her back as she turned away from Jake's assault. That's when all three men froze. Across Riley's back, from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, stretched an intricate tattoo in black ink. A wolf pack in military formation. 7 wolves running in perfect coordination, each animal detailed with precision that spoke of professional artistry. But it wasn't just the artistic quality that stopped the men cold. It was the unit designation etched below the wolves in military stencil font. Task Force 14, Army Intelligence, Classified Operations. And beneath that, a Latin phrase in smaller text. Solus et unitas. Alone and united. Derek Shaw, with his police background, recognized military ink when he saw it. Holy cow! Bobby Patterson, who'd served 2 tours as regular Army, understood exactly what Task Force 14 meant. Special operations. Deep cover assignments. The kind of soldiers who went places that didn't officially exist and did things that never made it into reports. Jake Thompson, who'd never served a day in his life, only knew that the woman he'd just assaulted was staring at him with the cold confidence of someone who'd been in real combat. Count the scars, Riley said quietly, pulling the torn shirt closed. I already did. The 3 men realized simultaneously that their routine intimidation had just escalated into something far beyond their comprehension. They weren't dealing with a nervous quality control inspector. They'd just physically assaulted a federal investigator with special operations training. Bobby was the first to back down, his hands moving away from his sides in a gesture of surrender. Look, we didn't know. You didn't know what? Riley's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command in hostile territory. That assaulting federal investigators carries a minimum 5-year sentence? That obstruction of justice becomes a terrorism charge when it involves former military intelligence? Derek's radio crackled with routine security communications, but his hand made no move to respond. He was calculating how quickly his career would end when federal investigators discovered his involvement in tonight's incident. Jake struggled to process what had just happened. His simple intimidation routine had revealed that their target wasn't a target at all. She was a predator who'd been hunting them since the moment she arrived. Task Force 14, Derek said quietly. That's the unit that took down those weapon smuggling networks in Syria. Riley tilted her head slightly. Among other operations that remain classified. We're about to witness something that will shock you, and I haven't even revealed the biggest twist yet about who's really been pulling the strings this entire time. But first, can you imagine the fear these 3 bullies are feeling right now, realizing they just attacked someone trained to handle much more dangerous enemies than them? Share in the comments what you think Riley should do next, and I'll reveal the mastermind's identity
right after this. Bobby Patterson dropped to one knee, then the other, his military training overriding his criminal intentions. When faced with a superior officer, even a former one, certain responses became automatic. "Ma'am, we were not informed of your operational status. Request permission to withdraw from engagement."
Derek Shaw found himself kneeling as well, not from military protocol, but from the sudden understanding that his involvement in tonight's assault would end his career and likely result in federal prison time. Jake Thompson remained standing, but his face had gone pale. "This is insane! You're just an inspector." "No, Mr. Thompson. I'm someone who spent 3 years documenting evidence against war criminals and weapons traffickers." Riley retrieved her phone and showed him a screen full of recorded conversations. "Documenting evidence against you was child's play." She looked down at the two kneeling men, then back at Jake. "Bobby understands chain of command. Derek understands law enforcement consequences. You seem to understand nothing at all." Riley activated the emergency call function on her secure phone. "Agent Hendricks, this is Martinez, requesting immediate federal response. Assault on federal investigator in progress. 3 suspects in custody." The phone's speaker crackled with Hendricks's response. "Federal units en route. Maintain position. Do not allow suspects to leave facility." Riley looked at the 3 men who'd planned to assault her into submission. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to remain exactly where you are until federal agents arrive. Any attempt to leave will be considered fleeing a federal crime scene." Derek nodded from his kneeling position. "Understood." Bobby maintained his military posture. "Ma'am, yes, ma'am." Jake finally grasped the enormity of his situation. Can we work something out?" "Mr. Thompson, I've spent the last 2 days documenting systematic harassment, safety violations, and financial irregularities. Tonight, you escalated to physical assault and attempted intimidation of a federal investigator." Riley pulled her torn shirt more securely closed. "The only thing we're working out is your sentence." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as federal response teams approached Memphis Steel Works. Riley could hear helicopters overhead. Agent Hendricks wasn't taking any chances with officer safety. Within minutes, the shipping bay filled with federal agents wearing tactical gear and carrying arrest warrants. Agent Hendricks approached with handcuffs and a grim expression. "Martinez, are you injured?" "Torn clothing, no physical harm, but I've documented everything for prosecution." Hendricks surveyed the scene, 2 men kneeling in submission, one standing in shocked silence, and Riley maintaining operational composure despite her torn shirt. "Bobby Patterson, Derek Shaw, Jake Thompson, you're under arrest for assault on a federal officer, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate federal workers' rights." As the 3 men were processed and read their rights, Riley realized that the physical confrontation had been the easy part. The real challenge was still ahead, exposing the person who'd coordinated this entire system of suppression. "Agent Hendricks," Riley said, "we need to find Barbara Wells. She's the real target." "Already covered. Team 2 is at her residence now." Riley looked around the shipping bay that had become a federal crime scene. 3 supervisors who'd thought they controlled Memphis Steelworks were being loaded into federal transport vehicles, but the mastermind who'd orchestrated years of systematic harassment was about to discover that her perfect system of plausible deniability had one fatal flaw. Riley Martinez wasn't just any quality control inspector. She was exactly the kind of investigator who specialized in hunting people who thought they were untouchable. As Riley waited for medical personnel to document her torn clothing and any potential injuries from the assault, she reflected on the evening's events. The wolf pack tattoo on her back wasn't just military art. It represented her unit's philosophy that lone wolves die, but coordinated packs take down any predator. Tonight, Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson had learned the difference between being predators and being prey. And Barbara Wells was about to learn the same lesson. Barbara Wells sat in her home office at 11:37 p.m., reviewing financial spreadsheets on her laptop, when the doorbell rang. Through her window, she could see federal vehicles parked along her quiet suburban street. Blue and red lights painted her living room walls in rotating patterns. She'd been expecting this visit since Agent Hendricks called 20 minutes earlier to inform her that 3 Memphis Steelworks supervisors had been arrested for assaulting a federal investigator. Barbara had responded with appropriate shock and concern, offering full cooperation with the investigation. What she hadn't expected was the scope of the federal response. 8 vehicles, tactical team, search warrants. This wasn't a routine follow-up interview about employee misconduct. This was a raid. Agent Hendricks stood on Barbara's front porch, flanked by 2 other agents and a forensic accountant. Behind them, crime scene technicians waited with evidence collection equipment. "Ms. Wells, we have federal search warrants for your residence, personal computers, and financial records." Hendricks handed over the paperwork. "You're also under arrest for conspiracy to violate federal workers' rights, embezzlement of federally mandated safety funds, and obstruction of justice." Barbara's carefully maintained composure cracked for the first time in 6 years. "This is ridiculous. I'm the Human Resources Director. I protect employees from harassment." "Actually, Ms. Wells, our investigation shows you've been orchestrating harassment to eliminate potential whistleblowers while embezzling safety improvement funds." Hendricks nodded to the forensic accountant. "We have documentation going back 4 years." As Barbara was read her rights and handcuffed, federal agents began systematically searching her home office. They seized computers, file cabinets, and boxes of Memphis Steelworks documents that Barbara had been storing illegally. The forensic accountant, Agent Michael Park, immediately focused on Barbara's personal financial records, bank statements, investment portfolios, and real estate transactions that showed unexplained income far exceeding her HR salary. "Interesting mortgage payment history," Agent Park observed, studying Barbara's banking records. "Your house payments decreased by 60% 18 months ago." Around the same time, Memphis Steelworks delayed implementing OSHA-mandated safety improvements. Barbara remained silent, but her expression confirmed that Agent Park had identified a crucial connection. The money she'd embezzled from safety budgets had allowed her to pay off her mortgage early. Meanwhile, at Memphis Steelworks, Riley Martinez stood in the facility's conference room reviewing evidence with Agent Hendricks's task force. The torn shirt had been photographed and cataloged as evidence of assault. Her body camera footage provided a complete record of the evening's events. But the physical assault was just the beginning. Riley's real work started now. "Show me the financial evidence," Riley said, settling into a chair across from Agent Park's laptop. Agent Park pulled up spreadsheets showing Memphis Steelworks' safety budget allocations over the past 4 years. Every quarter, funds designated for workplace safety improvements were diverted to employee relations and workplace consultation expenses. Riley studied the numbers. "Those are fake categories." "Exactly. The money was being funneled through shell consulting companies that Barbara controlled. She'd create fake invoices for workplace harassment prevention seminars and team-building exercises that never happened." "How much total?" $2.7 million over 4 years. Money that should have gone to safety equipment, training programs, and facility improvements. Riley thought about Tommy Rodriguez's fear when discussing overtime procedures. about Maria Santos's warnings about workers losing hours and eventually leaving, about the systematic intimidation that had made Memphis Steelworks a fortress of fear. She wasn't just stealing money. She was investing in a system that eliminated anyone who might report the theft. Agent Park nodded. Perfect crime. Use stolen safety funds to finance harassment campaigns against anyone who might discover the theft. Anyone who complained about unsafe conditions got intimidated into silence or driven out entirely. Riley's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the Department of Labor Task Force. Barbara Wells had been processed and was ready for interrogation. But first, Riley needed to review the complete evidence package that would be presented during questioning. Agent Hendricks spread crime scene photographs across the conference table. Images of Barbara's home office showed filing cabinets full of Memphis Steelworks personnel files, documents that should never have left the facility. She was running intelligence operations on her own employees, Hendricks explained. Background checks, credit reports, family financial situations. She knew exactly which workers were vulnerable to economic pressure. Riley examined photographs of Barbara's computer screen showing spreadsheets with employee names, financial vulnerabilities, and harassment recommendations. Workers with high medical bills got reduced hours. Employees with large mortgages found themselves assigned to dangerous shifts. Anyone with union sympathies discovered that their safety complaints resulted in increased scrutiny rather than improved conditions. This is systematic psychological warfare. Gets worse. Look at this. Agent Hendricks showed Riley a document titled Employee Retention Through Controlled Attrition, Barbara's strategy guide for maintaining workforce control through strategic harassment. The document outlined specific techniques: isolate potential troublemakers, create financial pressure through reduced hours, escalate workplace hostility until targets voluntarily resign, maintain plausible deniability through helpful HR responses to formal complaints. Riley read Barbara's own words describing the system. Effective employee relations requires proactive management of dissent. Workers who feel protected by HR are less likely to seek outside intervention. By positioning myself as their advocate while coordinating systematic pressure, potential whistleblowers self-eliminate without creating legal liability. She documented her own crimes. Criminal masterminds often do. They're proud of their systems. Hendricks gathered the photographs, ready to watch her realize that her perfect system had one fatal flaw. They walked to the interrogation room where Barbara sat across from Agent Sarah Chen, a Department of Labor investigator specializing in white-collar workplace crimes. Barbara had declined legal representation, confident that her years of careful documentation and plausible deniability would protect her. She was about to learn otherwise. Agent Chen opened a thick file folder. Ms. Wells, let's start with your role as Human Resources Director at Memphis Steel Works. How would you describe your primary responsibilities? Employee protection and welfare, ensuring compliance with federal workplace regulations, maintaining a safe and harassment-free environment. Barbara's voice carried professional authority despite her handcuffs. Interesting, because our investigation shows that you've been systematically violating every principle you just mentioned. Agent Chen placed a photograph on the table. This is your home office. Why were you storing Memphis Steelworks personnel files in your residence? Barbara glanced at the image. Sometimes I work from home. Employee issues don't respect business hours. These aren't current employee issues, Ms. Wells. These are comprehensive dossiers on workers who filed safety complaints, union organizing attempts, and harassment reports dating back 4 years. Agent Chen spread additional photographs showing Barbara's intelligence files, credit reports, medical records, family financial information, psychological profiles. You've been building cases against your own employees, identifying vulnerabilities, planning harassment campaigns. Barbara's confident demeanor began to crack. You're misinterpreting routine HR documentation. Am I? Agent Chen opened her laptop and played audio from Riley's body camera. Barbara's voice filled the room, recorded during their seemingly friendly conversation that afternoon. Good work sometimes requires flexibility, willingness to adapt to local customs and procedures. Agent Chen paused the recording. What local customs were you referring to, Ms. Wells? Standard workplace adjustment procedures. The audio continued. I'll be interested to see your inspection reports. Quality control plays such an important role in maintaining our safety standards. Interesting tone for someone genuinely interested in safety improvement. Agent Chen switched to video footage from security cameras. This is you meeting with Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson yesterday morning, 30 minutes before Riley Martinez arrived for her first day of work. The footage showed Barbara in animated discussion with the three supervisors, pointing toward the factory floor and making gestures that clearly indicated coordination and planning. What were you discussing in this meeting, Ms. Wells? Routine supervisor briefing. About what specifically? Barbara hesitated. The question was simple, but any detailed answer would contradict her story about being surprised by the supervisor's behavior. Agent Chen sensed the opening. Let me help you remember. This is the audio from that meeting. Barbara's voice emerged from the laptop speakers. The new inspector has military intelligence background. We need to be more subtle than usual. Make her feel isolated and overwhelmed. But don't create obvious evidence of harassment. Barbara's face went pale as she heard her own words describing premeditated conspiracy. The audio continued. Jake, handle the direct intimidation but stay within plausible boundaries. Derek, monitor her communications and restrict her access codes. Bobby, be ready for escalation if psychological pressure isn't sufficient. Agent Chen stopped the playback. Would you like to revise your statement about routine supervisor briefing? Barbara remained silent, finally understanding that her years of careful planning had created a comprehensive record of criminal conspiracy. Here's what's truly shocking. We're not even at the most damning evidence yet. Riley uncovered something that will expose just how deep this corruption goes, and it involves people at the highest levels of the company. The next revelation will show you exactly why Barbara was so confident she could never be caught. But can you guess what the final piece of evidence is that's going to bring down the entire network? Share your theories below, and I'll show you how this all comes together in the most satisfying conclusion you've ever seen. Agent Chen opened a second file folder. Let's discuss your financial arrangements, Ms. Wells. Your salary as HR director is $68,000 annually. Yet your personal financial records show luxury purchases, mortgage payoffs, and investment portfolios worth over $400,000. Barbara's hands trembled slightly. I have other income sources, such as consulting work, investment returns. Agent Chen placed bank statements on the table. These are deposits from Workplace Solutions, LLC, Safety Dynamics, Inc., and Employee Relations Consulting Group, 3 companies that received substantial payments from Memphis Steel Works for harassment prevention services. Barbara stared at the financial records that detailed her embezzlement scheme. The interesting thing about these companies, Ms. Wells, is that they don't actually exist. Fake addresses, no employees, no services provided. Just shell companies designed to move stolen safety funds into your personal accounts. Agent Chen highlighted specific transactions. $2.7 million over 4 years. Money allocated for workplace safety improvements that instead funded your mortgage payments, luxury vacations, and stock investments. I want a lawyer. Of course. But first, let me show you something that might interest you. Agent Chen opened her laptop to video footage from Riley's body camera. This is tonight's assault, Ms. Wells, the culmination of your harassment system. Barbara watched in horror as Jake Thompson grabbed Riley's shirt and tore it, revealing the military tattoo that changed everything. She saw her carefully orchestrated intimidation system collapse in seconds as her supervisors realized they'd assaulted a federal investigator. Your employees are facing federal assault charges because you convinced them that harassment was company policy. Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson are looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Agent Chen paused the video. They're also looking for someone to blame, someone who trained them to believe that intimidating employees was not only acceptable but required. Barbara understood the implication. Her co-conspirators would cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The loyalty she'd purchased with stolen safety funds would evaporate when they faced serious prison time. What do you want from me? The truth, complete disclosure of your embezzlement scheme, harassment operations, and any other criminal activities at Memphis Steelworks. Agent Chen leaned forward. Cooperation might reduce your sentence from 20 years to 15. Barbara closed her eyes, calculating her options. Fight the charges and face decades in federal prison, or cooperate and hope for a shorter sentence. I need guarantees. You need to understand your situation, Ms. Wells. You've been running criminal operations for 4 years. We have documentation, recordings, financial records, and victim testimony. Your only choice is whether to cooperate or let your co-conspirators negotiate better deals by testifying against you. Agent Chen opened a third file folder containing victim statements from Memphis Steelworks employees. Dozens of workers had come forward with detailed accounts of systematic harassment, economic pressure, and safety violations. Tommy Rodriguez documented every conversation where supervisors threatened to reduce his hours if he filed safety complaints. Maria Santos kept records of workers who were driven out after reporting harassment. 47 employees have provided sworn statements about your harassment system. Barbara read the victim statements, realizing that her perfect system of intimidation had actually created dozens of witnesses who'd been documenting evidence against her. These people were supposed to be too afraid to talk. They were afraid until they learned that their experiences were part of a criminal conspiracy rather than individual harassment. Until they understood that federal law protects whistleblowers. Agent Chen gathered the statements. Until Riley Martinez showed them that intimidation systems can be defeated by people who refuse to be intimidated. Barbara finally grasped the scope of her defeat. Her harassment system hadn't just failed, it had been systematically documented and transformed into evidence of federal crimes. What happens now? Now, you decide whether to cooperate with federal prosecutors or let Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson tell their version of events first. Agent Chen stood up. Federal arraignment is tomorrow morning. Your lawyer can explain the plea bargain options. As Barbara was escorted back to her holding cell, Riley Martinez stood in the Memphis Steelworks conference room, reviewing the complete evidence package that would ensure justice for years of systematic workplace abuse. Agent Hendricks approached with a secure tablet showing real-time updates from the federal investigation. Financial Crimes Unit traced the embezzled funds through 18 different accounts. Barbara was planning to retire to Costa Rica next year with stolen safety money. Riley studied the financial flow charts. What about the other supervisors? Jake Thompson is cooperating. Detailed confession about harassment operations in exchange for reduced charges. Derek Shaw provided access codes to security systems and surveillance records. Bobby Patterson gave us names of other facilities where similar systems might be operating. Other facilities? Barbara wasn't working alone. This harassment and embezzlement system has been implemented at industrial facilities across Tennessee and Mississippi. She was part of a larger network of corrupt HR directors sharing techniques for suppressing whistleblowers while stealing safety funds. Riley felt a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Justice was being served at Memphis Steel Works, but the corruption was more extensive than anyone had imagined. How many facilities? Preliminary investigation suggests 12 facilities. Estimated total embezzlement exceeds $15 million. Agent Hendricks paused. Your investigation didn't just expose one corrupt workplace. You uncovered a regional conspiracy to defraud federal safety programs. Riley looked around the conference room where she'd spent the last 2 days gathering evidence. What had started as a simple quality control position had become the foundation for dismantling a multi-state criminal enterprise. What happens to the workers here? Full federal oversight during management transition. New safety equipment will be installed immediately using recovered embezzled funds. Workers will receive compensation for harassment and delayed safety improvements. Agent Hendricks smiled. Most importantly, the culture of intimidation ends permanently. Riley walked onto the Memphis Steel Works factory floor one final time. Federal agents were conducting interviews with workers who'd been afraid to speak out for years. The same people who'd avoided eye contact with her 2 days ago were now providing detailed testimony about systematic abuse. Tommy Rodriguez approached her near Welding Station 4. Inspector Martinez, I wanted to thank you for what you did. My wife and I were talking about finding work somewhere else because of the harassment. Now, maybe our kids can be proud that their dad works here. Maria Santos joined the conversation. How did you know? How did you figure out that Barbara was behind everything? Riley considered the question. Military intelligence training teaches you to look for patterns. Individual harassment looks random. Systematic harassment has coordination and planning. Someone with authority was making sure the harassment continued while maintaining plausible deniability. And the badge access problems? Perfect example. Technical problems are random. My access being restricted in specific ways that prevented me from gathering evidence wasn't random. Someone with administrative control was trying to limit my investigation. Other workers gathered around, no longer afraid to be seen talking with the inspector who'd exposed their tormentors. What made you stay when things got dangerous? Asked Linda Hayes, the security guard who'd responded to the emergency alarm. Riley thought about her military service, about operations in hostile territory where the mission required personal risk for the greater good. Sometimes standing up to bullies is dangerous, but letting bullies control workplaces is more dangerous for everyone. Riley looked around at the faces surrounding her. You all had the courage to document evidence and provide testimony. This victory belongs to everyone who refused to accept that harassment was normal. As Riley prepared to leave Memphis Steel Works for the final time, Agent Hendricks approached with a federal tablet showing news coverage of the investigation. Channel 7 News was broadcasting live from the facility parking lot. The reporter, Janet Williams, stood before the Memphis Steel Works sign as federal vehicles departed with evidence. Federal investigators have arrested 4 supervisors at Memphis Steel Works on charges of workplace harassment, assault on federal officers, and embezzlement of safety funds. The investigation was conducted by an undercover Department of Labor operative who documented systematic abuse over a 4-year period. The news footage switched to Department of Labor officials announcing expanded investigations at industrial facility across the region. This case demonstrates the federal government's commitment to protecting whistleblowers and ensuring workplace safety, announced Assistant Secretary of Labor Robert Chen. Workers have the right to report safety violations without fear of retaliation or harassment. Riley watched the news coverage with mixed emotions. Justice was being served, but the human cost had been enormous. Years of systematic intimidation, workers living in fear, safety improvements delayed while people worked in dangerous conditions. Agent Hendricks noticed her expression. Second thoughts? No, just thinking about the workers who suffered before we could stop it. Riley looked back at the facility. 4 years of harassment and stolen safety funds. People got hurt because Barbara Wells decided that her mortgage payments were more important than worker protection. And now she's facing 20 years in federal prison while the workers get justice and compensation. Agent Hendricks paused. That's how the system is supposed to work when people like you are willing to take the risks. Riley walked to her car as federal agents completed evidence collection and worker interviews. Memphis Steelworks would reopen tomorrow under new management with federal oversight, ensuring that the culture of intimidation could never return. But Riley's work was just beginning. Agent Hendricks had offered her a permanent position with the Department of Labor Task Force investigating workplace corruption. 12 facilities across 2 states needed the same kind of systematic investigation that had exposed Barbara Wells's criminal enterprise. As Riley drove away from Memphis Steelworks, she passed Tommy Rodriguez, leaving the facility with his head held high for the first time in years. She passed Maria Santos, talking confidently with other workers about safety improvements they could finally request without fear of retaliation. She passed Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson being transported to federal detention, their careers and lives destroyed by their participation in systematic harassment. And she carried with her the knowledge that workplace intimidation could be defeated by people willing to document evidence, gather allies, and refuse to be silenced by threats. Riley Martinez stood before the United States Senate Subcommittee on Labor Relations, preparing to deliver testimony about systematic workplace harassment and the federal response needed to protect American workers. The hearing room was packed with labor advocates, industry representatives, and media covering the most significant workplace rights case in a decade. Barbara Wells's embezzlement and harassment scheme had expanded into a federal investigation involving 12 facilities and over 40 criminal defendants. Senator Patricia Williams, the subcommittee chair, called the hearing to order. Ms. Martinez, you've become something of a symbol for federal whistleblower protection. Can you tell us about your experience at Memphis Steelworks? Riley approached the witness microphone, wearing a professional suit that concealed the Wolfpack tattoo that had changed everything 3 months earlier. Senator Williams, systematic workplace harassment isn't just about individual bullies. It's about corruption networks that use intimidation to suppress legitimate safety complaints while embezzling funds designated for worker protection. Riley presented evidence charts showing the financial connections between Barbara Wells's embezzlement scheme and harassment operations at facilities across Tennessee and Mississippi. Barbara Wells stole $2.7 million in safety funds from Memphis Steelworks over 4 years. That money should have been used for equipment upgrades, training programs, and facility improvements. Instead, it funded luxury purchases while workers continued to face dangerous conditions. Senator Williams examined the financial documentation. How did she maintain this system for so long without detection? By creating a culture of fear that prevented workers from reporting safety violations or financial irregularities. Anyone who asked questions about delayed safety improvements or submitted harassment complaints found themselves facing economic pressure, reduced hours, and systematic intimidation. Riley explained how Barbara's system worked. Identify potential whistleblowers through comprehensive background investigations. Apply targeted pressure using knowledge of workers' financial vulnerabilities. Escalate harassment until targets voluntarily resigned. Maintain plausible deniability through helpful HR responses that never resulted in actual protection. The genius of Barbara's system was that she positioned herself as the solution to problems she was creating. Workers who experienced harassment naturally turned to human resources for help. Barbara would express concern, document their complaints, and promise investigation. But behind the scenes, she was coordinating the harassment they were reporting. Senator Robert Chen, the ranking minority member, asked about federal intervention. What could have prevented this situation? Stronger whistleblower protection laws, regular federal audits of workplace safety spending, criminal penalties for HR directors who abuse their positions to suppress legitimate complaints. Riley paused. Most importantly, federal investigators who can conduct undercover operations to document systematic harassment before it destroys workers' lives. Riley's testimony continued for 2 hours, detailing the evidence-gathering process, the federal investigation, and the broader implications for workplace safety enforcement. The Memphis Steelworks case isn't isolated. Our investigation has identified similar harassment and embezzlement schemes at industrial facilities across multiple states. This isn't random criminal behavior. It's systematic exploitation of workers who depend on their jobs for family support. Senator Williams asked about the resolution. What happened to the workers at Memphis Steelworks? Complete management restructuring under federal oversight. New safety equipment installed using recovered embezzled funds. Compensation for workers who suffered harassment. Most importantly, cultural transformation that makes it safe to report safety violations and harassment. Riley showed photographs of Memphis Steelworks 3 months after federal intervention. New safety equipment, updated training programs, worker safety committees with real authority to implement improvements. Tommy Rodriguez, who was afraid to answer basic questions about overtime procedures, is now chair of the Facility Safety Committee. Maria Santos, who warned me about asking too many questions, leads the new worker advocacy program. They're the same people, but they're working in an environment where their voices matter instead of being suppressed. The hearing concluded with Senator Williams announcing expanded federal funding for workplace harassment investigations and strengthened whistleblower protection programs. As Riley left the Capitol building, she reflected on the journey from quality control inspector to federal witness. The wolf pack tattoo hidden beneath her professional suit represented more than military service. It symbolized the understanding that individual courage becomes powerful when coordinated with institutional support. Barbara Wells had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to embezzlement, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Jake Thompson received 5 years for assault and harassment conspiracy. Derek Shaw and Bobby Patterson received 3 years each for their cooperation with federal investigators. But the real victory wasn't in the prison sentences. It was in the transformation of Memphis Steelworks, from a fortress of fear into a workplace where safety complaints were welcomed instead of punished, where workers felt protected instead of intimidated, where federal law actually protected the people it was designed to serve. Riley's secure phone buzzed with a message from Agent Hendricks. New case. Industrial facility in Birmingham, suspected harassment and safety fund embezzlement. Similar pattern to Memphis. Interested? Riley looked back at the Capitol dome, where senators were drafting legislation inspired by her testimony. Then she thought about workers in Birmingham who might be facing the same systematic intimidation that had controlled Memphis Steelworks for 4 years. She typed her response. En route. The morning shift whistle sounded at 7 a.m. sharp, just as it had for decades, but everything else about Memphis Steelworks had changed. Tommy Rodriguez swiped his badge at the main entrance, the scanner flashing green as it had every day since federal investigators restored proper access protocols. No more restricted codes, no more arbitrary denials, no more fear that asking questions would result in punishment. As the new safety committee chair, Tommy conducted morning inspections that workers actually trusted. When he identified problems, management responded with solutions instead of excuses. When workers submitted safety complaints, they received investigations instead of intimidation. Maria Santos operated her crane with confidence, knowing that her years of experience were valued instead of treated as a threat. The worker advocacy program she directed had become a model for other facilities undergoing federal oversight. The break room where Riley Martinez had once sat in isolation now buzzed with open conversation about safety improvements, workplace conditions, and federal regulations that actually protected workers instead of being ignored by corrupt management. Barbara Wells' former office had been converted into a worker resource center, staffed by federal advocates who ensured that harassment complaints received proper investigation. The irony was intentional. The space once used to coordinate intimidation now served as a safe haven for workers seeking protection. At Welding Station 4, where Tommy had once been afraid to answer basic questions about overtime, a new inspector conducted routine safety evaluations. Workers approached him openly, confident that their concerns would be addressed rather than used against them. The inspector's badge read, James Patterson, Federal Safety Oversight. No relation to Bobby Patterson, the former night shift supervisor now serving 3 years in federal prison. But the name served as a daily reminder that federal protection was real, permanent, and backed by criminal penalties for anyone who attempted to restore the old system of intimidation. Near the shipping bay where Riley Martinez had been assaulted 6 months earlier, a memorial plaque honored workers who'd suffered under systematic harassment. The inscription read, "In recognition of employees who endured intimidation while documenting evidence that led to justice. Their courage transformed this workplace from a fortress of fear into a foundation of federal worker protection." But the most significant change wasn't visible in new equipment or federal oversight programs. It was in the expressions of workers who no longer feared their own workplace, who understood that safety complaints would be welcomed instead of punished, who knew that federal law actually protected them when they stood up to harassment. At lunchtime, workers gathered in groups to discuss safety improvements and workplace conditions. The conversations that had once been whispered in fear were now conducted openly, with confidence that speaking up strengthened rather than threatened their job security. Linda Hayes, the security guard who'd responded to Riley's emergency alarm, now headed the facility's federal compliance program. She ensured that every worker understood their rights under federal harassment and safety laws, that every complaint received proper investigation, that the culture of intimidation could never return. 6 months ago, people were afraid to be seen talking to an inspector, Linda explained to a group of new employees during orientation. Today, we encourage questions because that's how we identify problems before they become dangerous. The orientation included mandatory training on federal whistleblower protection laws, systematic harassment recognition, and proper reporting procedures for safety violations. Every new worker learned that speaking up was not only protected, but required for maintaining the safe working environment that federal oversight had created. As the afternoon shift began, Workers moved between stations with the confidence that came from knowing their workplace was governed by federal law rather than arbitrary intimidation. Badge scanners flashed green for everyone. Safety equipment was maintained properly. Overtime was distributed fairly. Most importantly, workers understood that the transformation wasn't temporary. Federal oversight would continue until the culture of worker protection became permanent. Criminal penalties for harassment ensured that future supervisors would face prison time for attempting to restore systematic intimidation. At 4 p.m., as the day shift prepared to end, Tommy Rodriguez submitted his daily safety report to federal oversight coordinators. No violations, no complaints, no workers afraid to speak up about dangerous conditions. The report was reviewed by Agent Sarah Hendricks, who'd been promoted to Director of Regional Workplace Safety Enforcement following the success of the Memphis Steel Works investigation. Her office oversaw federal intervention at 12 facilities where similar harassment and embezzlement schemes had been exposed. Memphis Steel Works continues to exceed federal safety standards, Agent Hendricks noted in her weekly report to the Department of Labor. Zero harassment complaints, full worker participation in safety programs, complete cultural transformation from intimidation to protection. The success at Memphis Steel Works had become a model for federal intervention at other facilities. Workers who'd been afraid to report harassment for years were finding their voices when they learned that federal protection was real and criminal penalties for retaliation were enforced. Barbara Wells, serving her 18-year sentence in federal prison, had become a cautionary tale for HR directors who might consider using their positions to suppress worker complaints rather than protect worker rights. Her detailed confession had exposed harassment networks across multiple states, leading to dozens of additional arrests and convictions. Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson were prohibited from working in supervisory positions for the remainder of their lives as part of their plea agreements. Their criminal records served as permanent reminders that federal law protected workers from systematic intimidation. But the real victory belonged to workers like Tommy Rodriguez and Maria Santos, who'd endured years of harassment while documenting evidence that eventually led to justice. Their courage in providing testimony had transformed not just their own workplace, but federal enforcement policies that would protect workers across the country. As evening approached, Memphis Steel Works prepared for the night shift under federal oversight that ensured safety and worker protection around the clock. The facility that had once been a fortress of fear had become a beacon of federal worker protection. The last badge swipe of the day belonged to a maintenance worker named Robert Chen, who conducted evening safety inspections without fear of retaliation for identifying problems that needed attention. His reports would be reviewed by federal coordinators who understood that worker safety required constant vigilance and zero tolerance for intimidation. The morning would bring another day of federal oversight, worker protection, and safety enforcement. Another day when speaking up strengthened rather than threatened job security. Another day when Memphis Steel Works demonstrated that systematic harassment could be permanently defeated by federal law enforcement and worker courage. Riley Martinez, now Director of Federal Workplace Investigations, received daily updates on facilities undergoing interventions similar to Memphis Steel Works. Her testimony before Congress had resulted in expanded funding for undercover operations and strengthened criminal penalties for workplace harassment. Her Wolfpack tattoo remained hidden beneath professional suits, but its meaning had evolved. The lone wolf tactics that had exposed Barbara Wells's criminal enterprise had become coordinated federal policy that protected workers across multiple states. The laptop on her desk displayed case files from facilities in Birmingham, Atlanta, and Jackson where systematic harassment and embezzlement schemes were being investigated using techniques developed during the Memphis Steelworks operation. Each case represented workers who were suffering under intimidation systems similar to what had controlled Memphis Steelworks for 4 years. Each investigation offered the possibility of transformation from fear to federal protection. Riley opened the Birmingham case file and began reviewing worker complaints, safety violations, and financial irregularities that suggested another Barbara Wells-style criminal enterprise. Tomorrow, she would arrive at the facility as a quality control inspector, armed with federal authorization and military training that had already proven capable of defeating systematic workplace intimidation. Her secure phone displayed a text message from Tommy Rodriguez. 6 months harassment-free. Safety Committee approved 15 equipment upgrades this quarter. Workers actually excited about coming to work. Thank you for showing us that federal protection is real. Riley smiled and typed her response. Thank you for having the courage to document evidence and provide testimony. Memphis Steelworks' success belongs to workers who refused to accept intimidation as normal. As she prepared for the Birmingham assignment, Riley reflected on the transformation that federal intervention had achieved. Systematic harassment could be defeated. Embezzled safety funds could be recovered. Worker protection could be enforced through criminal penalties for those who abused positions of authority. Most importantly, individual courage could become powerful when supported by federal law enforcement that treated worker protection as a criminal justice issue rather than a civil matter. The Memphis Steelworks case had demonstrated that Fortress of Fear could be transformed into foundations of federal protection. Tomorrow, Riley would begin the same process in Birmingham, armed with evidence-gathering techniques and legal authority that had already proven capable of dismantling criminal harassment networks. Count the scars. I already did. The words that had started everything 6 months earlier had become more than a personal motto. They represented federal policy that documented systematic harassment, gathered evidence against criminal conspirators, and transformed workplaces through law enforcement rather than hoping that voluntary compliance would protect workers. As Riley powered down her laptop and prepared to leave Washington for Birmingham, she carried with her the knowledge that workplace intimidation systems could be permanently defeated by federal investigators willing to go undercover, document evidence, and hold criminals accountable through prosecution rather than negotiation. The wolf pack tattoo hidden beneath her professional suit would remain concealed until the moment when Birmingham supervisors made the same mistake that had destroyed Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, Bobby Patterson, and Barbara Wells. The moment when they escalated systematic harassment into assault on a federal investigator with special operations training and legal authority to transform their criminal enterprise into evidence for federal prosecution. Justice wasn't a feeling. It was a file that outweighed denial. And Riley Martinez specialized in building files that criminals couldn't deny, workers couldn't ignore, and federal prosecutors couldn't lose. Riley Martinez stood in the Department of Labor's new Systematic Harassment Investigation Unit, watching her team of 12 undercover investigators prepare for simultaneous operations across 6 states. The success at Memphis Steelworks had evolved into something she'd never anticipated, a federal task force specifically designed to infiltrate and dismantle workplace intimidation networks. Agent Michael Torres, a former Navy intelligence specialist, reviewed case files from a textile facility in North Carolina, where workers reported harassment patterns identical to Barbara Wells' system. Agent Jennifer Walsh, ex-Air Force security, studied financial documents from a warehouse operation in Georgia, showing suspicious safety budget diversions. Memphis Steelworks was just the beginning, Riley told her team during their morning briefing. We've identified 47 facilities across 12 states using systematic harassment to suppress worker complaints while embezzling federal safety funds. The conference room walls displayed network analysis charts showing connections between corrupt HR directors, complicit supervisors, and shell companies designed to launder stolen safety money. Barbara Wells hadn't been operating alone. She'd been part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been suppressing American workers for over a decade. "The pattern is always the same," explained Agent Sarah Park, the team's forensic accountant. "Identify potential whistleblowers through comprehensive background investigations. Apply economic pressure using knowledge of workers' financial vulnerabilities. Escalate harassment until targets voluntarily resign. Maintain plausible deniability through helpful HR responses that never result in actual protection." Riley studied surveillance photographs from their current investigations. Workers who looked exactly like Tommy Rodriguez had looked 6 months earlier, afraid to make eye contact, nervous about answering basic questions, carrying themselves like people who expected punishment for speaking up. "Every facility we investigate represents families who've been living in fear," Riley said. "Workers who accepted harassment as normal because they needed their jobs to pay mortgages, medical bills, and children's education expenses." Agent Torres held up financial records from the North Carolina textile facility. "Same shell company structure as Memphis Steelworks. Same fake consulting invoices. Same pattern of safety improvements being delayed while HR directors buy luxury homes with stolen funds." Riley's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Hendricks, now Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for Criminal Enforcement. The Birmingham investigation had resulted in arrests of 5 supervisors and recovery of $1.8 million in embezzled safety funds. Another successful transformation from Fortress of Fear to federal protection. Birmingham facility reopened yesterday under federal oversight, Riley announced to her team. 0 harassment complaints, full worker participation in safety programs. Same cultural transformation we achieved at Memphis Steel Works. Agent Walsh looked up from her Georgia warehouse files. "How do we scale this? 47 facilities means we're looking at hundreds of criminal defendants and potentially $50 million in stolen safety funds." Riley walked to the map displaying their current investigations. Red pins marked facilities under active investigation. Blue pins showed facilities already transformed through federal intervention. The blue pins were growing, but slowly. "We scale it by training local investigators to recognize the patterns and by creating criminal penalties severe enough to deter future attempts." Riley pointed to legislative tracking charts. Congress is considering the Federal Workplace Protection Act, which would make systematic harassment a federal terrorism charge when it involves embezzlement of safety funds. The proposed legislation, inspired directly by Riley's Senate testimony, would classify coordinated workplace intimidation as domestic terrorism when combined with financial crimes. Penalties would include mandatory 20-year minimum sentences for HR directors who used their positions to suppress worker complaints. Agent Torres reviewed the terrorism classification criteria. Systematic intimidation designed to suppress constitutionally protected speech, combined with financial crimes against federal programs conducted through criminal conspiracy. That's textbook domestic terrorism. Riley nodded. Barbara Wells didn't just steal money and harass workers. She created a system designed to terrorize American workers into abandoning their constitutional rights to workplace safety and freedom from harassment. The morning briefing concluded with assignments for the day's operations. Agent Torres would begin his undercover assignment at the North Carolina textile facility as a quality control inspector. Agent Walsh would infiltrate the Georgia warehouse as a safety compliance coordinator. Two other agents would start long-term operations at facilities in Ohio and Virginia. As her team departed for their assignments, Riley remained in the conference room studying photographs from Memphis Steelworks' latest safety committee meeting. Tommy Rodriguez chairing discussions about equipment upgrades. Maria Santos presenting worker advocacy program achievements. Workers speaking openly about safety concerns without fear of retaliation. The transformation was permanent. Federal oversight had evolved into worker empowerment. The culture of intimidation had been replaced by institutional protection that would survive long after federal agents completed their direct supervision. Riley's reflection was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Agent Chen, a recent transfer from FBI White-Collar Crime Division, entered carrying a thick file folder. "We have a problem," Agent Chen announced. "Memphis Steelworks is receiving threatening communications from an organization calling itself the Industrial Management Defense League." Riley opened the file to review printed emails and social media posts targeting Tommy Rodriguez, Maria Santos, and other Memphis Steelworks employees who'd provided testimony against Barbara Wells. The threats were sophisticated, using language that avoided direct criminal liability while clearly communicating intent to harm. "Professional intimidation," Riley observed. "Someone with legal training wrote these threats to stay just within First Amendment protection while maximizing psychological impact." Agent Chen pointed to specific phrases in the threatening communications. "They know personal details about workers' families, home addresses, children's schools. This isn't random harassment, it's targeted intimidation designed to silence federal witnesses." Riley studied the threat analysis. The Industrial Management Defense League appeared to be a front organization for business interests opposed to federal workplace protection enforcement. Their communications suggested coordination with other facilities facing federal investigation. "They're trying to create a chilling effect, make workers afraid to cooperate with federal investigators by demonstrating that testimony against workplace harassment results in continued persecution." Agent Chen opened her laptop to show Riley social media profiles associated with the threatening communications. "We've identified connections to management at 6 of the facilities currently under investigation. This isn't random retaliation, it's coordinated witness intimidation." Riley felt familiar anger building as she reviewed evidence of systematic intimidation targeting the very workers whose courage had exposed criminal harassment networks. The same workers who'd risked their jobs to provide testimony were now being threatened for helping federal prosecutors achieve justice. "Federal witness intimidation is a 20-year felony," Riley said, reaching for her secure phone, "and it just became our highest priority investigation." She called Agent Hendrick's direct line. "We need immediate federal protection for Memphis Steelworks witnesses. Someone's trying to terrorize them into recanting their testimony." Hendricks's response was immediate. "U.S. Marshals will provide protection within the hour. FBI is opening domestic terrorism investigation into the Industrial Management Defense League." And Riley? "This proves we're winning. They wouldn't be trying to intimidate witnesses if our investigations weren't dismantling their criminal networks." As federal protection was arranged for Memphis Steelworks witnesses, Riley realized that her team's work was entering a new phase. They weren't just investigating individual facilities anymore. They were fighting a coordinated counterattack from criminal organizations threatened by federal workplace protection enforcement. The Wolfpack tattoo hidden beneath her professional suit had taken on new meaning. Individual courage remained important, but systematic criminal enterprises required coordinated federal response. The lone wolf tactics that had exposed Barbara Wells needed to evolve into pack coordination that could defeat organized witness intimidation. Riley gathered her team for an emergency briefing about the Industrial Management Defense League threat. They're trying to use fear to silence the workers who trusted us with their testimony. That means we have an obligation to escalate our response until criminal intimidation becomes more dangerous than cooperation with federal investigators. Agent Torres looked up from threat analysis documents. What kind of escalation? The kind that turns witness intimidation into additional federal charges against everyone involved in these harassment networks. Riley opened her laptop to show real-time surveillance of Memphis Steel Works. Federal protection for witnesses, criminal prosecution for threats, and expanded investigation into business organizations that support systematic worker intimidation. The Industrial Management Defense League had made a critical tactical error. By threatening federal witnesses, they'd escalated workplace harassment into federal terrorism charges while providing evidence of coordinated criminal conspiracy across multiple states. Riley's secure phone buzzed with updates from U.S. Marshals providing witness protection. Tommy Rodriguez and his family were being relocated to safe housing until the threat assessment was completed. Maria Santos was receiving round-the-clock protection while continuing her worker advocacy duties under federal supervision. They wanted to silence our witnesses, Riley told her team. Instead, they've given us evidence of criminal conspiracy to intimidate federal witnesses. That's a 20-year enhancement on top of their existing harassment and embezzlement charges. Agent Walsh studied financial records associated with the Industrial Management Defense League. Shell funding from the same business networks we've been investigating. They're using the same money laundering techniques for witness intimidation that they used for safety fund embezzlement. Riley smiled grimly as she reviewed the expanding criminal enterprise her team was documenting. They can't help themselves. They're so accustomed to using intimidation as a business tool that they don't recognize when they're creating evidence of federal crimes. The afternoon brought news that FBI raids on Industrial Management Defense League offices had resulted in seizure of computers, financial records, and communications showing coordination between corrupt facility management and professional intimidation services. Riley received real-time updates as federal investigators discovered evidence of systematic witness intimidation targeting workers at facilities across 6 states. The same courage that had exposed workplace harassment was being met with organized criminal retaliation designed to terrorize workers into silence. But the retaliation was having the opposite effect. Workers who'd been afraid to speak up about harassment were now seeing federal agents provide actual protection rather than empty promises. The intimidation that was supposed to silence testimony was instead demonstrating that federal law enforcement treated worker protection as a serious criminal justice issue. As evening approached, Riley stood in her office reviewing the day's developments. The Industrial Management Defense League's witness intimidation had transformed localized workplace harassment investigations into a national domestic terrorism case involving organized criminal conspiracy to suppress constitutional rights. Tommy Rodriguez called on her secure line. "Agent Martinez, I wanted you to know that the federal protection is working. My family feels safe for the first time since the trial ended. And the other workers see that federal law enforcement is real." Riley looked out her office window at the federal building where grand juries were reviewing evidence against 47 facilities and dozens of criminal defendants. "Tommy, your courage started something that's transforming workplace protection across the country. The threats you're receiving prove that we're winning. What happens next?" "Next, we prove that criminal intimidation of American workers results in federal prison sentences that make harassment more dangerous than cooperation with law enforcement." Riley paused. "And we make sure that every worker in America understands that federal protection is real, permanent, and backed by criminal penalties for retaliation. As Riley prepared to leave her office, she reflected on the evolution from lone wolf tactics to coordinated federal enforcement. The Memphis Steelworks investigation had grown into systematic dismantling of criminal networks that had been terrorizing American workers for decades. Her wolf pack tattoo represented not just military service, but federal policy that protected workers through criminal prosecution, rather than hoping that voluntary compliance would eliminate systematic harassment. The Industrial Management Defense League had learned what Barbara Wells, Jake Thompson, Derek Shaw, and Bobby Patterson had discovered 6 months earlier. Intimidating workers was dangerous when those workers were protected by federal investigators with special operations training and legal authority to transform harassment into criminal evidence. Riley's last task of the day was reviewing surveillance reports from her 12 investigators working undercover at facilities across 6 states. Each agent was documenting systematic harassment while building criminal cases that would result in facility transformation similar to Memphis Steelworks. The mission continued. Justice expanded. And American workers were discovering that federal protection was more than a promise. It was a file system that documented criminal harassment until evidence outweighed intimidation. Count the scars. We already did.
You are not alone. Someone wants to hear you. Share your story. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like and subscribe to Stereo.